It was supposed to be a routine Friday broadcast, the kind producers liked: low risk, moderately rated, and cleanly scripted. Daylight Politics, filmed live from Des Moines, had booked a panel to discuss federal agricultural subsidies and trade policy. The usual talking points, the usual faces. Jasmine Crockett sat second from the left, her blazer perfectly pressed, expression calm, voice prepared. She was used to being the only black woman on panels like this. Used to being introduced with less fanfare. Used to nodding politely as others interrupted her mid-sentence. What she wasn't used to, or perhaps what she'd finally stopped tolerating, was being ignored even before she spoke. The host, Shelley Berard, opened the segment with her trademark smoothness. "Joining us today," she said, "Congressman Seth Ridge from Ohio, senior member of the Trade Committee, Senator Ron Deller, chair of Ag Appropriations." Then, without pause, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas. That was it. No mention of her work on the subcommittee for Global Humanitarian Strategy. No mention of her recent proposal for clean water accountability in foreign aid packages. Just a name, a seat, and a smile that meant, "Stay in your lane." Jasmine didn't flinch, not on the outside. She leaned forward, smiled slightly, and adjusted her mic. "I appreciate the chance to join you all," she said. Her tone was even, her posture relaxed, too relaxed, some would think. But it was a calculated stillness, the kind a person learns when interruptions are expected before they finish a single point. The conversation began the way these panels always do: abstract policy first, local anecdotes second, partisan jabs somewhere in between. Ridge railed against the inefficiency of green subsidies. Deller countered with a defense of Iowa corn's global importance. Jasmine waited, poised. When her turn finally came, she chose her entry point carefully. "I think we're framing this discussion too narrowly," she began. "If we talk about subsidies without acknowledging the international downstream, especially in West African agricultural economies, we're missing the cost that doesn't show up on our balance sheets." Shelley smiled, a bit too tightly. "Let's keep the focus here for now, Congresswoman. We'll circle back." They never circled back. Jasmine exhaled slowly and folded her hands on the table. Across the studio, just outside the camera's frame, a young production assistant approached Shelley's desk with a small envelope. Shelley scanned it, eyebrows tightening slightly, then slid it beneath her stack of notes, without a word. The show continued. What Jasmine didn't know, not yet, was that the envelope contained a printed copy of an email sent 2 days prior from an international human rights group. It had been addressed to multiple congressional offices and media outlets. The subject line read, "Urgent Advisory, U.S.-backed water project, suspended in Kaya, Burkina Faso." The reason? Elevated mercury levels traced to a facility co-funded by an American chemical conglomerate. Jasmine had read the email. She had forwarded it to 3 colleagues. No one replied. Later, she would learn the producer had chosen not to raise the issue on air, citing insufficient domestic interest. In real time, though, all she could feel was the same weight she'd been carrying for months. A series of minor dismissals, tiny decisions that never made headlines but always made impact. A suggestion cut from a script, a question rewritten to avoid foreign complexity, a name left unspoken. In Congress, she'd raised the topic of water access in Kaya 4 times during subcommittee remarks. Each time, the transcripts listed her words. Each time, the C-SPAN crawl skipped over them. No one objected. They just didn't respond. And so here she was, again, wearing the right suit, saying the right things, being tolerated, never really heard. The irony? She wasn't even trying to make a case about Burkina Faso in that moment. She was simply connecting dots, painting a larger picture, that American subsidies didn't exist in a vacuum, and that what was planted in Iowa sometimes uprooted lives across the ocean. But dots only matter if someone wants to see the picture. As Ridge launched into a rebuttal, laced with phrases like "ungrateful foreign nations" and "let's fix home before playing hero abroad," Jasmine nodded once, just once. Her eyes didn't roll, her face didn't flinch. She just nodded, almost like a closing prayer. The moment passed unnoticed by most. But if you'd watched closely, you'd have seen her thumb resting just above the table's edge begin to press lightly against the side of her palm, back and forth, in a slow, rhythmic motion. It was something she'd done since law school. A quiet, grounding ritual. A way of saying to herself, "You're still here, even if they don't see you." The panel continued. Shelley pivoted to rising diesel costs. A chart appeared on screen. Ridge cracked a joke about green new folly. Laughter from someone off camera. Jasmine smiled again. Measured, civil. But inside, something had moved. Not a crack, not yet, but a shift, a knowing that no matter how polished her delivery, no matter how prepared her notes, there were rooms she would always be asked to speak in, but never truly be heard. And maybe, just maybe one day, she wouldn't ask anymore. The Monday after the broadcast, Jasmine Crockett returned to D.C. on the 6:20 a.m. flight out of Des Moines. She sat by the window, head against the glass, earbuds in but no music playing. Her team had offered to book a later flight, to give her time to decompress, but she declined. The truth was, she didn't need rest. She needed routine. Routine was where she could disappear. She landed, grabbed her overnight bag, and headed straight to the Hill, a quiet walk up East Capitol Street. No cameras, just the hum of city buses and the low murmur of commuters wrapped in early morning silence. It was how she liked it. By 9:00 a.m., she was at her desk reviewing a stack of committee reports. Her inbox was full mostly form responses, press digests, and the usual Monday deluge. But one email, sent overnight, stood out. Subject: Preliminary findings. Gorsi water contamination. From Ibrahim Traore. It wasn't long, just a few bullet points. A map, 3 photos. Children presenting with tremors and vision loss. Local wells testing above acceptable thresholds for mercury. Community clinic requesting assistance unable to identify contamination source. The third photo was blurry, a child sitting on a wooden chair, legs dangling, a basin of water near his feet. But what drew her eye was the caption scrawled at the bottom of the file. "He doesn't understand why it burns." Jasmine closed her laptop slowly. No one else in her office saw her flinch. For weeks, the same pattern repeated. News came in quietly. Always from Ibrahim. Always off record. No press releases, no press interest. Just quiet, desperate truths. She tried. She really did. During one hearing on infrastructure funding, she brought up international water safety as a parallel to Flint. She noted that U.S.-backed water sanitation initiatives overseas often lack the oversight they would be required to have stateside. She didn't name names. She didn't push too far. The chairman cleared his throat. "Let's stay focused, Congresswoman." She nodded. At a televised panel on development aid, she attempted to reference Kaya directly, just a few words, carefully placed. The segment producer cut her mic 5 seconds in, citing a need to move along to more actionable topics. She smiled. She always smiled. Because that was how you kept your seat. Not your chair on the floor, your literal seat in the room. A woman like her, raising her voice, was emotional. A woman like her, staying silent, was professional. So she learned to speak in code, to wrap her questions in policy-neutral terms, to phrase her outrage as suggestion. It worked, kind of. She stayed in the rooms. But the price was high. Late one night, past 11, Jasmine sat alone in her office. The floor was quiet. Most of the lights were off. Only the low buzz of an old vending machine hummed in the hallway. She was rereading the latest field report Ibrahim had forwarded. This time, it wasn't just a water issue. A shipment of mosquito nets, rerouted by a U.S. contractor due to budget constraints, had left hundreds of families exposed during the rainy season. 6 children had died from malaria in a single week. 6. There were names and ages. Fatima, age 3. Hassan, age 6. Musa, age 4. Aisatu, age 5. Rahim, age 2. Seydu, 8 months. 8 months. She whispered the names aloud, one by one, like a ritual, like a ledger no one else had opened. No cameras, no headlines, no op-eds in the Hill. Just a congresswoman in a dark office, holding a list of children who never learned to spell their names, and wondering how silence could feel so loud. She didn't tell her staff what she was carrying. Not really. They knew broadly. They had seen her late nights, heard the occasional frustrated sigh, noticed how she'd stopped accepting lunch meetings with defense lobbyists. But Jasmine kept the details close, partly out of caution, mostly out of shame. Because every time a new report came in, every time Ibrahim whispered another failure into her ear, she felt it. Not guilt, exactly. Something sharper. A kind of helpless accountability. Because she had power. Not a lot, but enough to know. Enough to have tried harder. She had a platform. And a voice. And yet the most she'd done was thread sorrow into policy debates and pray that someone, somewhere, was listening between the lines. She almost broke once. During a fundraising dinner in Arlington, a donor leaned in over his steak tartare and said, "You've got good instincts. Just don't waste them on non-issues. Nobody votes based on Africa." She excused herself to the restroom, washed her hands 3 times, looked into the mirror for too long, then walked back out and thanked him for his support. Her smiles weren't fake. They were armor, worn by someone who knew that outrage came with a cost, and that cost wasn't always worth it, not in the short term, not in election years. So she smiled. On panels, in hearings, in green rooms before the cameras rolled, even when Ibrahim sent her a voice memo just 3 minutes long where you could hear wind and yelling and a mother crying in the background, pleading in a language Jasmine didn't speak, but didn't need translated. She listened to it twice, in full, then went on air to discuss trade tariffs, starting her first answer with a soft nod and a pleasant, "Thank you for having me." What they didn't see was the notebook in her desk drawer. Black leather cover, no title. Inside were pages and pages of handwritten notes clipped from Ibrahim's reports, scrawled with arrows, underlined in red, circled in blue. There were photos printed and taped inside, not official press photos, just ones Ibrahim had snapped himself on a borrowed phone. A cracked well, a collapsed roof. A child sitting cross-legged on dry earth with an IV taped to their arm and nothing else in the room but a fan that didn't work. Jasmine didn't look at the notebook often, just enough to remember why she kept it. She didn't know what she was waiting for. A moment, maybe. A signal. Something bigger than the quiet. Because if there was one thing she knew, truly knew, it was this. Eventually, silence makes a sound, and when it does, it echoes. Friday morning came again, as it always did. Jasmine Crockett flew back to Des Moines the night before, rehearsed her lines twice in the hotel mirror, and walked into the Daylight Politics studio with a smile tight enough to pass for confidence. The show's rundown was standard. 10 minutes on domestic fuel subsidies, 5 on federal crop insurance, a segment on international trade vague enough to mean whatever the host needed it to mean. She'd been through this before. This time, though, something was already off. The host, Shelley Berard, greeted the panel with her usual polished warmth, but her eyes kept flicking to the control booth. The floor manager whispered to a tech. Jasmine caught the word foreign aid package on someone's clipboard in bold circled twice. Her segment wasn't scheduled until later. Something had changed. Jasmine adjusted her earpiece, shifted in her seat, and looked into the camera. Then her phone vibrated. It wasn't a buzz for texts, alerts, or reminders. This one she recognized instantly. A secure line. Only one person used that ringtone, Ibrahim. She didn't reach for it right away. Instead, she looked down at it, as if it were a stranger, like it might explode in her hand. The segment had just started. Congressman Ridge was talking about ethanol incentives, The camera was tight on him, but Jasmine heard none of it. Her hand moved slowly, deliberately. She flipped the phone screen side up. Ibrahim Traoré incoming call. The call wasn't expected. And that's exactly why she answered. She didn't say hello, not at first. Just placed the phone near her lap, leaned slightly away from the microphone, and whispered, "What's going on?" His voice came low, static in the background, as if he were outside. "Are you alone?" "No," she said softly. "I'm on set." "I know," he replied. "I watched the opening. I wouldn't call if I had time." Her breath caught. "Tell me." "There's been a leak," he said. "The chemical plant. We traced the mercury to a U.S.-funded project in Gursi. The pipes are failing. They've known for months." Jasmine's fingers stiffened around the phone. "Children?" she asked. "They're getting sick. Nosebleeds. Disorientation. A teacher collapsed yesterday in the courtyard. They thought it was heat. It wasn't." She closed her eyes for a moment. "How many?" "Dozens, maybe more. We're just getting the samples now. But it's worse than before." She said nothing. He continued. "They buried 3 children last week. No autopsy. The parents don't have lawyers. The village doctor didn't even report it." Jasmine looked up. The camera light had turned back toward her. Her cue was coming. "Ibrahim, why now? Why call during this?" "Because I finally got the inspection records," he said. "They're signed. The oversight report was falsified. It's a U.S. contractor." Her stomach turned. She didn't need to ask which one. "I can send them," he said. "But I thought maybe people would listen if it came from you." "On air?" she whispered. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Shelley turned toward her. "Congresswoman Crockett, you've studied the implications of long-term trade on smaller economies. Would you say U.S. policy has been consistent?" Jasmine didn't answer right away. The producer's voice buzzed in her earpiece. "She's live. Pan to her. Cut if she freezes." The phone was still in her hand. And in her mind, she saw the rusted pipes, the photos from Ibrahim, the image of a child with chemical burns on their hands holding an empty plastic cup. She turned to Shelley and said something she hadn't planned to say. "Actually, I think we're skipping a very important part of that conversation." The room stilled. Shelley blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Most people don't realize that when we fund international infrastructure, the contracts don't always include enforceable standards. That includes water sanitation. That includes chemical disposal. And that includes lives, real ones that we tend to leave out of the conversation." Shelley raised an eyebrow. "Congresswoman, are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting," Jasmine said calmly. "I'm stating. We've known for years that certain U.S.-funded projects overseas operate under lower safety thresholds than they do here. And in Kaya, Burkina Faso, this morning 3 more children paid the price." The control room erupted. "Cut to B-roll," someone shouted. "Go to commercial." But Shelley didn't interrupt, not yet. Jasmine went on. "I received confirmation an hour ago from President Ibrahim Traoré himself. A pipeline we funded is leaking mercury into the ground. It wasn't reported. It wasn't fixed. Because the oversight mechanism wasn't enforced. Because the cost of fixing it was deemed too high." Her voice didn't rise. Her hands didn't shake. But the room was no longer comfortable. And the mask, the polished congressional mask, had fully slipped. The show cut to commercial 15 seconds later. The silence in the studio was deafening. Jasmine sat back, phone on the table, eyes ahead. Shelley leaned forward. "What just happened?" Jasmine looked at her. "No more waiting," she said. "They keep saying there's no appetite for foreign tragedy. I'm done waiting for people to get hungry." The call from Capitol Hill came in within minutes. Then another. Then the press office. Then someone from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Her chief of staff texted, "They're asking if this was authorized." She didn't reply. Ibrahim's final message came in seconds later. Just 3 words. "You said it." She sat back, finally exhaling. For the first time in months, she wasn't wondering if her silence made her complicit. This time, she had spoken. But the fallout came quickly. By that evening, a dozen political commentators had called it a breach of decorum. Some called for censure, others called it grandstanding. A few said it was the most honest moment they'd seen from a sitting member of Congress in years. The video clip, just under 2 minutes, was already on YouTube. No background music, no graphics, just her voice, measured and unwavering. The caption read, "Congresswoman Crockett breaks the script, names U.S. contractor in foreign poisoning scandal." It had 400 views by midnight. But Jasmine didn't watch it. She turned her phone screen down, walked back to her hotel room, and stood at the window for a long time, staring down at the parking lot lights of Des Moines like they might offer her answers. They didn't. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel small. And somewhere across the ocean, a child went to bed, lungs aching, but maybe, just maybe, still breathing, and Jasmine whispered a name that no one on her panel would remember. Gorsi. Because this time, someone had said it. The morning after the broadcast, Jasmine Crockett walked into her office 2 hours earlier than usual. There were already 10 voicemail messages waiting. Most were from people she didn't know. A few were from former colleagues, people who once replied with thumbs-up emojis to her committee updates, but hadn't texted in over a year. Now, their words carried urgency. "You lit a fire," one message said. "Be careful not to get burned." Her staff greeted her with cautious energy, not panicked, not celebratory, just wide-eyed. A low hum of uncertainty filled the space. Coffee cups sat untouched. Screens were filled with paused news segments, transcripts half-highlighted. At her desk, a printed copy of her quote had already been pinned to a memo board. "They keep saying, there's no appetite for foreign tragedy. I'm done waiting for people to get hungry." She didn't tell anyone, but those words hadn't been prepared. They had simply arrived, fully formed, the moment she decided she wouldn't protect anyone's comfort anymore. The clip from the show had reached over 1 million views by noon. It was being discussed across platforms, Twitter threads, Reddit forums, cable segments, even late-night monologues. Some praised her clarity, others dissected her tone. A few tried to link her to anti-business activism. She expected all of it. What she didn't expect was the message from the CEO of the contractor in question. It was short, sent via Public Relations Counsel, polished. "We take these allegations seriously." The Congresswoman's remarks were unfortunate. "We encourage constructive dialogue, not unfounded claims." She read it twice, then walked into the conference room and closed the door behind her. She didn't scream, didn't throw anything. Instead, she pulled out the small black notebook from her bag and turned to the page marked Gorsi, Water Data. There, in her own handwriting, was the pipeline inspection date, November 11, 7 months prior. Beside it, a copy of the field contractor's signature. At the bottom of the page, Ibrahim had written a question. If they knew in November, how many children drank from those pipes between now and April? Jasmine stared at that sentence until it blurred. Then she opened her laptop. That afternoon, she sat in front of a blank Word document for nearly an hour. Finally, she typed the opening line, "There are 2 ways to poison a village. One is with mercury, the other is with silence." She kept writing. Not a press release, not an op-ed. A letter to the American people. She didn't consult with legal. She didn't edit for tone. She just wrote until the truth had a shape. By 6:00 p.m., the letter was live on her official congressional site. Her team uploaded it to Medium, shared it via a link with the subject line, "A response and a reckoning." The letter read, "I did not name that company on television out of anger. I named it out of necessity, because I have seen the inspection reports, because I have heard the voicemails of mothers whose children are vomiting every morning, because I have read death certificates that say unknown when everyone on the ground knows exactly what caused the suffering. This is not about politics. This is about what happens when profit is placed above safety, not in theory, but in the bodies of children who had no choice." Some of you will say, "But it's not our fault. We didn't know." And that's exactly the point. We were never supposed to know. It was designed that way. Invisible contracts, quiet payments, muted warnings, paperwork that hides the cost under the word foreign. But foreign doesn't mean forgettable. I won't debate my tone. I won't justify my grief. I'd rather be dragged for feeling too much than praised for protecting people who knew better and did nothing. The post went viral before midnight. It was shared by medical workers, human rights groups, teachers, students, parents. A screenshot of the phrase, "foreign doesn't mean forgettable," was reposted by a nurse in Milwaukee, a teacher in Baltimore, a college student in California whose brother had died from lead poisoning in a New Jersey housing project. The truth had found its echo. But with visibility came threats. On Saturday, Jasmine's staff began receiving anonymous emails, some cruel, some vaguely legal. One read, "You'll never get another bill passed again." Another, "You just became the face of weaponized empathy." She read them all. Not to punish herself. To stay clear. Because for the first time, her words weren't being diluted in committee chambers or buried in sound bites. They were being read in full. And some people were terrified of that. By Sunday morning, 3 of her colleagues privately reached out. One offered support quietly. Another offered advice even more quietly. The third simply asked, "Do you want this to be your legacy?" Jasmine didn't respond. Because that question, intended to scare her, only confirmed that she had already created one. That night, she appeared on a live stream with a group of students from Howard University who had requested a Q&A on humanitarian policy. She was tired, her voice hoarse, but she logged in anyway. Midway through, one student asked, "Do you think people really care, Congresswoman? Or do they just click and move on?" Jasmine paused, then answered, "I don't think caring is the same as acting, and I don't think clicking is the same as changing. But I also think we can't act on what we never hear. So my job isn't to make you care. It's to make sure no one can say they didn't know." The clip of that, quote, just 17 seconds, would become one of the most replayed moments of her entire public life. Not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. No shouting, no anger. Just a woman, speaking with the clarity of someone who had carried the cost of her restraint and now understood the value of her voice. A day later, the contractor issued a second statement. This time, they didn't call her remarks unfortunate. They announced an internal investigation. It wasn't an admission of guilt, but it wasn't silence either. That evening, Ibrahim sent a short video. It showed a crowd of villagers outside a well. A technician, government approved, was pulling water samples in real time. Behind him, children watched quietly, holding plastic containers. Ibrahim didn't speak in the video, but at the very end, the camera panned up to a banner someone had tied between 2 trees. Hand-painted, in French, "Un nouveau maintenant." They see us now. By Monday, the air in Washington had changed. Not dramatically, not with press conferences or resolutions, but in the quiet corners, the private caucus calls, the elevator glances, the barely audible whispers in hallways. People were listening. And not just listening, remembering. They remembered her voice, calm, unswerving. They remembered the phrase, "Foreign doesn't mean forgettable." And most of all, they remembered that she hadn't flinched. That kind of thing lingers. Jasmine didn't take a victory lap. There were no celebratory interviews, no media blitz. She returned to her desk as usual, coat slung over her chair, laptop open to the same reports no one else had bothered reading weeks before. But something was different now. When she requested a floor minute to speak on humanitarian accountability, she wasn't denied. The clerk simply nodded. When she entered a committee session, no one cut her off. They let her finish. They still didn't agree with her, but they couldn't ignore her. And that in Washington was almost more powerful than agreement. That same week, she flew to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. No press entourage, no party banner, just a folding podium at a community rec center beneath a faded mural of local kids playing basketball. Around 80 people showed up. Farmers, teachers, students. A retired mechanic named Elvin, with a notepad in his front pocket. Jasmine walked in alone. She didn't wear a campaign pin. She didn't bring notes. When she stepped to the mic, the room quieted. "You've all probably heard what happened last week," she began. "Some of you might have watched the clip. Some of you maybe only read the headlines." She took a breath. "But I'm not here to argue over how it looked. I'm here to explain why I said what I did and what I didn't say sooner." She told them about the leak in Gursi, the inspection that was signed off and shelved, the children whose names never made it to any screen but her own. She told them about the silence that isn't caused by ignorance but by design. A woman in the third row raised her hand. Late 40s, glasses, denim jacket. "I respect what you did," she said, "but I gotta ask, why them? Why not our kids first?" Jasmine nodded slowly. She'd expected this question. She welcomed it. "That's fair," she said, "but I don't believe compassion is a pie. Giving a piece to someone else doesn't mean there's less for you." The room shifted not with applause, but with stillness, the kind of silence that leans forward. And when a child in Iowa drinks poisoned water, we call it a crisis. We demand answers. But when it happens somewhere we can't pronounce, we treat it like a footnote, if that. She scanned the room. "I'm not asking you to fly across the world. I'm asking you not to look away just because it's far." Elvin stood next. Same blue flannel as before. "I told you last time," he said. "My daughter's a nurse. Cried every night during COVID. Said the same thing. They didn't have to die, Dad." He looked at Jasmine, voice rough but clear. "Now I see. She wasn't just talking about hospitals. She was talking about how we forget people when they're not convenient." She didn't reply right away, just gave a small nod. That moment, that sentence, would end up in more transcripts than her entire trade testimony ever had. After the event, she stayed, talked to everyone, took every question, even the pointed ones. A teenager in the back asked, "Do you think any of it will change?" Jasmine looked out the window, then back. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know it won't if we stay quiet." That night, back at the hotel, she sat on the floor of her room, laptop open, shoes off, phone buzzing every few minutes with updates from her staff. One message stood out. From Ibrahim, "They're replacing the pipeline. Clean water will reach Gursi by next month." Another pause. The company didn't admit it, but they acted. Sometimes shame works better than proof. And then, "They've started saying your name here. First it was American lawmaker. Now it's Jasmine." She stared at that message for a long time. Not because she didn't believe it, but because for so long she hadn't thought the words she carried could travel that far. In the days that followed, the news cycle moved on. Other headlines rose, scandals, elections, sports scores. But the clip still floated, reposted again and again by people who'd never watched C-SPAN in their life. A TikTok version paired her words with soft piano music. An art student in Michigan painted her silhouette over a backdrop of desert soil and called it audible. And somewhere in Kaya, Burkina Faso, a new mural went up hand-painted by children on the side of a concrete clinic wall. It showed a woman holding a cup of water, with light behind her. Above it, in block letters, it read, "She said our name." Back in D.C., one of Jasmine's colleagues pulled her aside in the hallway. He was older, moderate, the kind who smiled but always checked the wind. He lowered his voice. "You know they're watching now, right?" Jasmine smiled, just slightly. "They always were," she said. "They just didn't expect me to speak." That Friday, she was invited back to Daylight Politics. Same chair, same host, same studio. This time, she declined. She didn't need another panel. She had already left the echo. And the echo, whether they liked it or not, was still ringing. Sometimes, it's not the loudest voice in the room that changes things, it's the one that chooses to speak when silence is easier. Have you ever been in a space where you knew something was wrong, but everyone else kept moving like nothing happened? Have you ever held a truth so heavy that saying it out loud felt like setting off an alarm no one wanted to hear? Jasmine Crockett did. She spoke not to be praised, not to go viral, not to win, but because she could no longer carry the cost of saying nothing. And maybe that's where real strength begins. Not in the spotlight, but in the quiet decision to stand up even when your voice trembles, to name what's been ignored, to feel deeply, and still choose action. So if you've ever wondered whether your words matter, whether your pain is too far away for anyone to care, remember this: the smallest echo can still reach across oceans if someone is willing to listen. If this story moved you, we invite you to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that empathy doesn't stop at borders and truth doesn't need permission to be spoken. You don't need a title to care. We'll see you in the next story. Stay tuned.